This is Red Podcast, episode number 219, talking about lessons from the gun show, what you can learn from this hillbilly business. That's coming up.
This is the Red Podcast, the marketing podcast for influencers. Rise above the noise. Expand your audience. Deliver impact. Here's your host, David Hooper.
Just finished up this book called Hillbilly Elegy. You may have heard something about it. It's getting a lot of press. It's one of the top books on Amazon right now. And I picked it up because it's kind of how my family is, hillbillies. Not my direct family, but my father grew up that way. And my grandfather was that way. Great-grandparents, coal miners, farmers, railroad workers. That's what my family is composed of. So I got this book thinking, maybe it'll help me learn a little something about my family. It's a great book if you're interested in American culture and why a lot of our political situation is the way that it is right now. It's called Hillbilly Elegy. I have it linked in the episode notes, redpodcast.com/219. I've got a related story for this episode, which is why I bring up Hillbilly Elegy. And that is growing up with a hillbilly extended family. I grew up in Nashville, Tennessee, but I've got relatives just a few hours away in the hills of East Tennessee and also Virginia. For the most part, they're good people, but they're also rednecks. And like most rednecks, they love their guns a lot. And because of this, whenever there was a gun show in Nashville, they would load up in the car, head down the highway, and they would stay with me and my parents over the weekends that these gun shows would take place. My grandfather, he was actually an ammunition dealer. He would come down by himself quite often. He would pack his car so full of ammunition, the trunk, the back seat up to the ceiling, the passenger seat up to the ceiling, that this car looked like a lowrider. It's probably quite dangerous as well, not only because it was low, but it was filled with things that would explode. This is the Red Podcast, the podcast for influencers. If you're a blogger, podcaster, speaker, marketer, somebody with a message to spread, this is the podcast for you. I'll show you how to spread that message, make people care about it, and make money with it. And on this episode, we're talking about the gun show. If you've never been to a gun show, let me explain what it is. There are a lot of stereotypes about gun shows. I will say everything you've heard is true. Gun shows, not just guns. It's more like a flea market with gun-related stuff. There are a lot of niche products, self-published books, conspiracy theory-related merch, a lot of white power, a lot of KKK stuff, blowguns, ammunition, a lot of military surplus. And the people at a gun show, also stereotypical. That's kind of where I come in. These dudes who worked the show, a lot of them were old, a lot of them were out of shape, a lot of them smoked, and they were on the gun show circuit. They would travel from show to show. Every weekend throughout the South, there's a different gun show going on somewhere. And these guys would go from town to town, living on fast food, sleeping in the trailers that they pulled behind their trucks. The only times that they would move was when they were unloading their trucks, getting the merchandise into the booth that they set up inside the show, or loading the merchandise that they didn't sell back into their trucks to go to the next city. And here's where I come in. I'm a 13-year-old kid sitting there helping my grandfather out. These guys saw me, and why would you do that heavy lifting yourself when you could hire a 13-year-old kid to do it for you? It's one of my very first jobs. People saw me helping my grandfather. They'd approach me to help them. I did. I got paid in tips, and pretty soon, I was showing up every time a gun show came through town. Because this was a circuit, multiple gun shows, every couple weeks it seemed like there was a gun show, I got to know these guys, and I learned a lot of business lessons from them. And I was really surprised because I looked at these guys, and they didn't look like much. Like your stereotypical redneck, jeans, flannel shirts. A lot of them, I call them the Billy Badasses, would actually dress up like they were in the military or something. Some of these guys claimed to be mercenaries and that foreign governments would pay them to go into war zones and kill people. That's what they claimed, kind of the soldier of fortune kind of vibe. I don't know if that was true or not, but that's what they would claim. And I kind of made a lot of judgments with these guys. They're all driving trucks. They had trailers behind the trucks that they would live in, or they carry their goods. They ate fast food. Didn't seem like high class to me, but when they would pay me, they would pull out these huge wads of cash, hundreds and hundreds of dollars, thousands of dollars, break me off a few of the smaller bills, and I would go on to the next guy who would do the exact same thing. One time, I got the promoter's address, and I was fascinated by this guy because when I looked him up, I knew somebody on his street. And the person that I knew on his street, his dad was a doctor. This guy was in a big house. And the promoter also in a big house. So I was fascinated by this. It showed me that there was a road to money, to financial success, that wasn't just accountant, doctor, attorney, the stereotypical professions that you think make a lot of money. So here's how these guys did it. Day in, day out, they would buy low and they would sell high, which is pretty obvious, right? But let me explain how they would do it. My grandfather, he had this thing called the 1% rule, and 1% was actually 200%. His goal was to double his money on every sale. And this is how it was done in the gun show, and this is how it applies to you. How it was done was geography. These guys were traveling around the Southeast. Some of them would go to the Midwest, and some types of guns were more popular in some regions than they were others. Some types of guns were easier to get in some regions than they were others. Some types of memorabilia was easier to get. Some types of these self-published books were easier to get. So what these guys would do is they would go into these situations where it was easy to acquire something, and they would take it across state lines into a different area of the country, and they would sell it at a higher price where it wasn't easier to acquire. Now, a lot of shadow businesses do this. Drugs, for example. In some cities in the United States, drugs are plentiful. If you take them into cities where they're not as plentiful, the price is going to be higher. And the price is higher for a lot of reasons. For one, as I mentioned, supply and demand, but why is there not such a supply? Well, there's a risk to get something to these regions. It's tougher to get something to these regions. Same thing for you as an influencer. If you're a guy in New York City, there are a lot of guys doing what you do in New York City. If you're a musician, for example, in Nashville, there are a lot of musicians in Nashville. But if you're going to go to these geographic areas where there are not a lot of guys like you, where it takes a little work to go to these places, you're going to be able to command a higher price. I know several guys, they're making a killing doing these B and C level markets because people just don't want to go to them. These are the only guys that will take these gigs. Like me, I don't do that. You're going to fly me to LA. You're going to fly me to New York. I want to be able to get into an Uber, get into a cab, and go directly to the venue. I don't want to get on these 2-lane highways and have to drive 2 or 3 or 4 hours, especially if it's up north in the wintertime when it's snowing. But if you're one of these guys who's willing to do that, your price can go through the roof. The right geography, either because something is rare or it's tougher to get something there, or a combination of both, will increase the amount of money that you can get for doing the exact same thing. Now, this isn't necessarily flying across the country. Let me give you a gun show story that doesn't have anything to do with going across the country, but going down the road maybe a mile or two. So the gun show, the way it would work is these guys would come in at the beginning of a weekend, and they would leave at the end of the weekend. Now, I needed to be there in case somebody came in late or somebody left early, but a lot of my time in the middle was just hanging out. So what I decided to do was go into the business of buying things that I could get cheaply and selling those things later for a higher price. The same thing these guys at the gun show were doing. I had no interest in guns. I was 13 years old, couldn't buy a gun if I wanted to. Well, between you and me, I probably could have. Like I said, all these stereotypes are true. But I decided to invest my money in knives. Saw this guy one day selling these cheap Chinese knives, what I call a Rambo knife, a survival knife. Big knife, goes on your hip, kind of thing that would make a 13-year-old boy feel like a badass. Had a hollowed out handle, and you could unscrew the handle, and inside had some survivalist stuff. Had a saw in it. It's basically a chain that you could use to chop down small trees. Had some stuff that you could start a fire with, some flint, some matches. He's selling these things for $5. But I knew that I could get more than $5 for them if I took them somewhere else. In this case, the somewhere else was my school. I bought up all these knives for $5, took it to my school, immediately sold out of them, $20 each. I quadrupled my money. Buy low, sell high. How did I do it? Geography. And that geography may be a mile down the street, not that far away. You don't have to go across the country to take advantage of geography in your pricing. Another big lesson that I learned from the gun show was repeat business and how important that was. My grandfather had such a reputation in the ammunition business that people would call my parents' house, they knew where he was staying, before he got into town to set appointments with him before he could meet with anybody else. And what that meant, because he didn't have a big car, like I said, he's putting ammunition in the trunk, he's putting ammunition in the back seat, he's putting ammunition in the passenger seat. What it meant is that he could sell out of all of that without having to go to the show. Or if he did go to the show, he could focus on the geographic deals that I'm talking about, buying low, taking the goods somewhere else to where he could sell high. Here's how this relates to you as an influencer. It's super exciting to go out and find new customers. It's super exciting to think about Facebook ads, to think about pay-per-click, to think about what we call marketing in our business. But marketing isn't just new customers, it's also old customers. And old customers, that's where the money's made. Time and time again, you can go back to these people, make a little bit of money every time, make a lot of money every time. Older customers, money on the table. So let me tell you how I do that. Let's take it back to geography. Let's say you're a speaker, you're at an event. You collect names, you collect emails, you put that in your spreadsheet under people that you've met at this specific event. You're niching out your list. You could do this via event. You could do this via geography. You could do this with the specific goods that they've purchased from you. You could do this with a specific problem that these people have. So let's say you meet somebody at a specific event. You go into that event next year. Only email people that you've met at that specific event. That way you can get very detailed. You can talk about last year. You can talk about what you said last year. You can talk about what you did there last year. Makes them feel like they know you, brings back all those memories. You can't do that to a general list. You go just to them with a very specific message. And what if it's people that have approached you for a very specific problem? What if you've got a database of only those people? You find an article that talks about that specific problem. It's a great way to keep in touch with those people. Send it just to those people with just the information that they asked you about, with just the solution for their specific problem. You can't do that to a big list. Way too many influencers only have one list. You should have multiple lists. And I got 2 ways for you to do this. One of them is super easy. If you use Gmail, you can do this with a spreadsheet and this program called GMass. I'm going to have it linked. It's at redpodcast.com/219. It's amazing. Using Gmail, a program you're probably already using, you can send individual messages to people in a very specific list. You can do as many lists as you want. You can send as many emails as you want. You can segment any way you want. If you want information on it, redpodcast.com/219. I'll have it linked in the episode notes. Also, if you want to automate a list that you've already got, ConvertKit. This is the way to do it. You don't have to segment it. You can segment it automatically based on individual links that people click. I'll have this linked in the episode notes. You can actually get a free 30-day trial. Go to createyourlist.com for that free 30-day trial. It's super cool. We've been using it with amazing results. Segment your list and go to those people that you've already made contact with the exact message that they need to hear. You're going to be amazed at how powerful that is. I got one more big one for you. This is a great one for anybody in the influencer business. My grandfather, he knew a lot about guns and even more about antique ammunition. This is a guy who should have been a consultant for Hollywood. If you watched an old war movie with him, an old cowboy movie, he's going to tell you that that gun wasn't even made, that no way could they fire that many rounds. He's going to tell you everything that's wrong about the ammunition and guns that they were using. And because of the relationships that he had with customers, he also knew what people had to sell and what they were looking to buy. So he had specialized knowledge and he knew what people wanted. Specialized knowledge, it allows you to buy for less. It allows you to sell for more, but it also allows you to be the deal maker that puts everything together. So even if you're not getting a lot of money for a deal itself, when people see you as the deal maker, connecting two separate parties that don't know each other so they can have a good deal out of that, they give you the credit. Now, this is something with your business that you should think about. You get an offer for a gig, they're looking for somebody like you. For whatever reason, you're not the guy for that gig. Why not call one of your influencer buddies, get those two parties together, get them talking. You get credit for putting together that deal. And in the future, because of that goodwill, you're going to get additional business from both sides. Final thoughts. If you got an opportunity to go to one of these events, even if you're like me, you've got absolutely no interest in guns, I would highly recommend it. The firearms industry in the United States, $32 billion. It's a huge industry, and there is a lot that you can learn from it when it comes to business and marketing. I've actually got some more lessons that's coming up. If you want to subscribe to make sure you don't miss that or future episodes, go to redpodcast.com. One click is all it takes. If you're on an iPhone, an Android, you listen to Red Podcast via the web, one click is all it takes to never miss an episode. If you've got questions or comments, the best way to do that is via Twitter. My username, @DavidHooper. Thanks so much for listening to Red Podcast. I'll see you on the next episode.
You've been listening to Red Podcast, the marketing podcast for influencers. Never miss an episode. Subscribe now with your iPhone, Android, or via RSS at redpodcast.com.